So we're going to talk about atomic design in Drupal and how GraphQL and Twig can help us to build clean, concise, and well-structured front ends, which has been, atomic design and Drupal haven't been great friends ever. So all approaches to connect Drupal to Patternlab, or in our case, Fractal, and gradually building up user interfaces from small building blocks doesn't work very well with the way Drupal thinks about render arrays and the way it builds up a page before it's sent to the browser. But first, let's start with a short recap of the first amazing art. So we were talking, or we presented you the idea of using GraphQL in Twig to fetch data into Drupal templates, into actually any Drupal template, without the need to implement pre-processing functions that are hard to track and keep in mind. We showed you how queries are assembled automatically if templates include other templates, and how to achieve decoupling within Drupal. So instead of using React, we're going to decouple our applications in Drupal first. And this time, we're going to do a real-world example. We're going to build a website for a completely fictional web agency called Amazing Apps. And the end result will look like this. And this might be a little much for 1 hour, but we wanted to pack in as much information for you as possible. So we came up with a different approach. So we have prepared a GitHub repository that contains all source codes necessary to build and run this website. There's also a README to do this. You don't have to do this right now, because what we're going to do now is I'm essentially talk you through the Git history of this repository, and we look at all the steps that have been taken to acquire this end result. And you can have a look at this repository later, or open it right now and just look at it on the go. And also refer to the recording of this webinar later on when you try it out yourself. So this is the project. On the left, you see the Git history. And we're going to start from the bottom. There are first a lot of less interesting parts. There is just, we initiated the project with the Drupal Composer template. So it's a vanilla Drupal installation built with Composer. Then we have some handy configuration files. We exported the initial site configuration basically from it's a little cleaned up Drupal standard profile installation without commands and the config module, because we don't need that right now. Then we added the modules that were required to build this website. So this is for, first of all, providing default content that you can easily test it. We added pattern normalizers, default content, and our own default content module to provide test content. And the actually important part is we're using, obviously, the GraphQL module, the GraphQL core module, which is included in the GraphQL module and provides all the GraphQL fields and resolvers on behalf of Drupal core, the GraphQL Twig module, and the GraphQL views module. Then in the next step, we just committed some developer-friendly settings, since this website is not supposed to be deployed to a production environment anyway. So the GraphQL endpoint is accessible for anonymous users from the outside. So you can use Insomnia or the PHP Storm GraphQL extension to help you. Then the caches are turned off and Twig debugging is turned on by default if you check out this repository. Then we added some image presets that we're going to use. And since this is a company website, we added node types for job offerings. So we have a open positions, a jobs listing, and team members. And then we also created a view with a GraphQL display. So this is that's where we use the GraphQL views module that will provide a field that allows us to fetch related content based on taxonomy terms. So every node will have a GraphQL field that lists all other nodes that share the same taxonomy terms as this node. Then we created a lot of default content. And we initialized a completely empty theme. And then we finally get to the part where it gets interesting. We initialized Fractal within this theme. So Fractal is an atomic design tool. It helps you to build UI components in the well-known atomic design structure, or basically any structure you want to build them in, and creates a nice display. And we're going to just switch into our themes folder and run npm run dev. Obviously, I did an npm install beforehand. And this brings up the right now empty Fractal interface. So below this section here, there should be components as soon as we have some. So we're going to switch back into our Git history. I think we can jump over the README, and there is the addition of the first basic styles. So this is the lowest level of atomic design are basic styles that apply directly to already existing HTML elements. We're going to define some colors, very fancy with CSS custom properties. Then just have some demo text content to showcase how text is going to look like. Headline examples, ordered and unordered lists, just an image, and a theming layer that allows us to switch colors for certain regions of the page, and styling for Drupal tabs. We're going to check out this revision and switch back into Fractal, and it already updated. And we can look through the color presets. So the design consists of 3 colors. So default is just white, black, is yellow, and blue, which shouldn't resemble a well-known corporate identity. Then this is our text base style, then different header variants, unordered and ordered lists, an image. So we laid the groundwork to build on top of that. So we have our colors, we have our typography all in place. So the next important part right now, if we look at the Drupal side, so nothing is styled here. The homepage is also not found yet, but we already see that the font doesn't apply to this. So in the next step, we link the style sheets, the style sheet that Fractal builds into our Drupal theme by creating or defining a Drupal library that basically just loads from dist-style.css. That's the build directory that we configured for Fractal, and require this library in our theme info. That's it. Check out this revision and clear the cache. Well, at least the font changed. So now it's time to create our first actual component. And it's going to be the logo. The logo is as easy as possible, just an embedded SVG shape and some stylings for coloring that SVG according to the current text color and automatically sizing appropriately. And if we're going to check out this revision and look at Fractal, let's close the base. The new section atoms appear. And here's our logo. So what else will we need? Obviously a menu. So we've created a basic menu molecule, and that's where it gets a little more interesting because we're actually going to use GraphQL. So if we look at the menu.twig file, that's rather simple. We're rendering an unordered list with class menu, and we're iterating over a variable called links, and we expect every link to contain a URL and a label, and we're rendering just this list, and this is going to be our menu. Then there is the menu.config.yml. Config.yml files in Fractal allow you to provide test data for your component. And here we're pre-filling this links variable with just some test items. And the most important part is this menu.twig.graphql. This file, as we already learned in the last Amazinar, will automatically be picked up as soon as Twig renders this menu.twig. And here, we're just defining a fragment. This is not yet a query, but we're defining a fragment to pull all information from a menu in Drupal to actually display this menu. So how do we get here? If we switch back to Drupal and go to the GraphQL Explorer, your one-stop shop for trying out and playing around with GraphQL. And we search the schema for menu. So we can see that there is a menu type that has the links property, a description of this menu, and a name. And we also see that the root query type has a field called menu by name. And that's what we're going to use. It's already initialized here. Restart anyways. So we're going to fetch a menu, and the name is just the main menu. Then we want all links. This is an object that White complains and wants us to pull additional properties. And we're going to need the label and the URL, which is an object itself, and from this URL, the path. And executing this query will essentially give us back exactly the structure that we're expecting in our menu component template. And if we're going to check out this revision, we can have a look at Fractal. We have a new section, molecules, that contains the menu that just renders a menu. Down here in Fractal, that's quite handy. We have the rendered output to look at. That's nice for debugging. The template that is being rendered, the data that is put in by Fractal, so our test data in this case, and also additional assets like this is the CSS file that will be loaded. And you can also add additional documentation or information to your components. So the page will add this logo atom and the menu molecule essentially in the header and the footer of the page. And that's what atomic design kind of refers to as organisms. So organisms are the biggest building block, and they're essentially, so I think, I'm not sure if there is a hard rule on that, but in general, an organism should not be included in another organism, because this would be weird if you think about it. So organisms are the top level building blocks that you use to assemble your pages. And we defined here a header and a footer organism. If we look at header.twig, it includes the logo and the menu component. And what's important here is this hash logo to address the logo component. That's something we included both in GraphQL Twig. So GraphQL Twig will search the components folder and enables you to address any component template that's in there with hash component name. And Fractal, our Fractal configuration does the same. So components can be addressed the same way in Fractal and in Drupal. And that's how we can make them work this nicely together. Then the header has itself, again, a GraphQL fragment. And this time, this fragment actually pulls the main menu and then applies our menu fragment from before. So it just says, okay, I'm going to use this object and I'm going to use this template. And by referring to the template's definition of which information it needs, we can make sure that the responsibilities are where they should be. So the header just says which menu, and the menu can define how to render and which information it needs. Then we also have some stylings for the header and also a configuration file. And this time we're using another Fractal feature in the context. Instead of, again, defining data for all menu items, we're going to fill the header nav variable with add menu. And Fractal will pick this up and just pull in the context that has been defined in the menu component. So that's how you don't have to recreate your test data throughout all your components all over the place. And the footer organism looks very similar. So we're also including a menu and then a hard-coded context block. And the main difference is that we're going to fetch a different menu, but with the same structure. Again, the same menu component with the same menu fragment. We're going to check out this revision. And we have two layout organisms. That's our header. It included the logo on the left and the menu on the right. And the footer organism, which has this context block and, again, the menu on the right. So now we obviously want to put these two organisms somewhere. And so we're advancing to the next level of atomic design, which is layout. And we're going to define a layout that will be the top level frame of our page. And layouts are a little different, at least from our perspective, than other components, because they don't, or they should not, or that's kind of a best practice that we derive for ourselves, that layouts don't get data and display it, but, and this works very well together with Twig, they just expose blocks that can be overridden. So in Twig, you can define a block in any template, and another template that extends on this can override whatever this block is doing. And then we also have some stylings for this layout, and then we're going to look at it. So this is our layout. We have a yellow themed header area, a standard white content area, and this dark colored footer. And these dashed boxes are essentially rendering of this placeholder component that was included in our basic fractal setup. And now we would like to bring this layout into Drupal. And that's our first step, where we get back into our Drupal theme. So we defined a page.html.twig. And that's where we actually start writing a GraphQL query. So our page.html.twig defines this query on top and just calls the header and the footer fragment. So it just tells the system, include into this query whatever header and footer need to display. The page template itself doesn't know what this is. And then it, as said before, extends the page layout from our atomic design pattern, and it overrides the header block to, instead of displaying this placeholder box, actually including the header component and passing in whatever is in the GraphQL variable. So the query results of this query will end up in a Twig variable called GraphQL. And we know that in this case, we don't have any fields ourselves, so we just can pass in the whole object. And again, including the header component automatically makes sure that this header fragment is available. Then the content block. In the content block, we are for now just rendering whatever is in the Drupal themes content area. So no GraphQL or Twig magic at this point. And then the footer is again the same as the header. So we're going to check out the revision. Clear the cache just to be sure. Get back to our home page. And there it is. Our header and footer with the menu items that are actually in our main menu. The page itself is not yet found. Since we have Twig debug mode enabled, we get this nice little GraphQL icon on the top left, actually of every template that uses a GraphQL query. And clicking here brings us into the GraphQL Explorer with the query that was assembled for this template ready to be debugged. So that's our main debugging feature, to check which query has been built for this template and is executed, and it will also pass the right variables, as we will see later on. Okay, so we have our overall frame for this page, for this website. And we successfully connected and executed a GraphQL query that was built by our pattern library in Drupal and used it to populate our first components in Drupal. And now we're going to draw the rest of the whole. So there are a lot of other components obviously in there and in use, and they all follow roughly the same pattern. So we have our HTML component, we provide some dummy data in Fractal, and then we map them to Drupal. But this is, checking out this revision will seriously populate our Fractal instance. So if we have a rough look, so we've already seen everything in base. Then we have a more link that can be used for wherever we want to display something like read more, like in teaser listings, a special style publish date, which is an interesting, perhaps because it like pulls the date twice and runs it through Twig's date filter. So the layout or the design is in tight control of how everything is displayed. Then we have a simple title component, which is a little larger H1. Then there are teaser components with a thumbnail. Then listings of teasers. Then a teaser box that has a listing and a headline and this more link at the bottom, and they come in different colors. Then our organisms, in our organisms we define, or we assembled now from all these components that you've seen before, different types of pages. So this is what our homepage is going to look like. Then a simple basic page, which just consists of the headline and the text. A blog with a header image that will also display related data at the bottom. Then a blog listing page, and in general the same for jobs and for team. Then there is another layout called grid that just assembles a couple of elements in a grid. And then what we have not seen yet, there are also pages. So pages are not really a part of atomic design, but the uppermost layer where you just assemble demo pages to showcase your design to the client, essentially. So we have one sample page that just shows the outermost layout, but without any content. And then we have an example page component that will just showcase the page layout with all content organisms to get a feel how it looks like. You can also click here and switch in full screen mode of Fractal. Okay, so we just have every little piece of design we need to display our page, our whole website, but it's still not connected to Drupal. And that's where we're going to look at a new and nice little feature we've got in GraphQL Twig. We don't have a real name for it, but I called it just theme-based routing. So in your theme, you can define like something that are just easy routes, static routes that you need. We have our home route here, and this basically causes Drupal to create a new menu callback that will just search for a template called home.html.twig and try to display it with GraphQL. So this is our home.html.twig, and it will just include the home component. And the home component defines the homepage fragment. We can look at this here. So we have the home component, for example, that includes a title with a hard-coded title within our template and some nice subline. And then it includes the teaser box 3 times with different nodes. So first with team listing, then with a jobs listing, and then with a blogs listing. And this is our homepage fragment that exactly does that. So it fetches nodes of type job that are published and just gets the latest 3 of them. And roughly the same happens also for blog, team, and jobs. In these cases, the queries are easier and they include other components, but that's something you can look at later yourself. And if we check out this revision, here the cache. Our page should be found. Yes. So home is defined as the home page, the start page in this Drupal installation. We see now that we have a second query active within this page render, which makes a lot of sense since this is a separate template, which is fully dependent on the current path or where we're at. And the outermost query that just fetches the menu for header and footer doesn't depend on the current path at all, and therefore can also be cached across all requests. So it makes a lot of sense to have 2 queries here. That's also often a question when it comes to GraphQL is, should we cram everything into 1 query? No, you shouldn't, because often it makes sense to use 2 queries to allow better caching. If we had everything in 1 query, this would mean the whole query and also the menus would have to be refetched for every different page. And this way we can optimize caching. And we have a second debug button that will bring up the assembled query for the homepage. So this is the query part that we've seen before. And we also need the teaser fragment in this case, which defines that we need the title, the date, the URL, and the thumbnail image to display the teaser for a node. And this should also work for all the other pages now. So this is blog listing. jobs listing and the team listing, which all look kind of the same. And the last part that is still missing is the actual node display. So this is still the standard Drupal rendered node. And we also want to display nodes the way we defined it. So we have already have a team member component that displays the team member's portrait on the left and the content on the right, and also shows blog posts in this team member's field of expertise and jobs that you could apply to become a colleague of him or her. And to do this, we do something that is actually very similar to what we do in React. We're building a generic node template that, as you see on the right, will just fetch the current node. So that's something where we're overriding node.html.twig. In node.html.twig, there is already a variable called node that contains the current node. And GraphQL Twig tries to match existing template variables to query arguments of the current query that is executed for this template. And in this case, it also transforms entities into their string representation, which is the ID. And then we load the node again, which looks a bit clunky, but it's not a problem in this case because the node is already in the Drupal's entity cache, so this is not a performance problem. And what we do then is we're going to fetch the type name and then apply simply all fragments for of these organisms that define these content pages. So we have one organism for the basic page, one for the article, and one for the team member, and one for the job. And every one of these comes with its own GraphQL fragment to define what this page needs or what this node actually contains and needs to be displayed. So we just assemble them all in a query. So all these fields get fetched if they're available. And then based on the outcome of this type variable, if this is a node page, a node article, node team member, or node job offer, we're just going to include a different component. And this way we don't have to recreate node.html.twig for every node type, but can make this a little more dynamic. Unfortunately, it can't be super dynamic, so we're not able to have something like include and then just a variable that contains the type name. That's because the GraphQL query is assembled at Twig compile time. So to not lose performance on assembling queries, we're collecting the query and all these fragments when the Twig template is first compiled into a PHP file, but at this time, we have no idea what the variables are. So this whole automatic assembly of the GraphQL query only works when include is used with a static variable, with a static string. Then it will know to attach the page fragment that is needed to properly execute this query. And so we're going to check out this revision and clear the cache again. And here's our layout, along with related content. And if we look at this query, we see that these are our types that we added. And these are the fragments. So in case of a node page, we just pull the label and the processed body text. In case of an article, we also want the image field. And this is where GraphQL views that we've seen at the very beginning kicks in. So this is a field that is defined by views and will match just taxonomy terms and find related nodes based on that. And we just return these nodes and apply the teaser fragment to get everything the teaser needs to be displayed, and so on. Yes, so this is the end of our Git history. Time for questions, if you have some.
Cool. Thanks, Philip. Justin has a quick comment, which is, what advice would you give on when this approach makes more sense than going fully decoupled?
Budget. So this way you can leverage atomic design or well-structured design that wouldn't be possible with plain Drupal rendering, because Drupal forces you to use 4 different templates to render this thing if it's a view. But you don't have the budget or the risk. You can't take the risk to go fully decoupled, because there's still a lot of stuff that doesn't work in a fully decoupled environment. And the other thing is, you might not need fully decoupled. For like this page has barely any benefits from being implemented in React, technically, because it would be statically cached by Varnish and just pushed out, and there would be a very small performance margin you would gain by using React in this case. That probably wouldn't justify the much higher effort of actually implementing this in React, especially if you perhaps want to use a contact form where you would have to implement mutations again and make this work with React. Or even the big elephant in the room is still web form. It's a very beloved module that has a lot of great use cases, and we still just don't have a proper way to decouple it yet.
Cool. Justin writes, yeah, makes sense. Thanks. Daniel writes, using this approach, are you missing functionality like quick edit that comes in core?
In this example, yes, but technically you don't have to, because, for example, quick edit just relies on some data attributes on tags, like on the field wrapper tag, and you could emulate them yourself. And the other important part is that you don't have to run everything through GraphQL. So if you, for example, have a node that is just fine if you display it with Drupal standard mechanisms, you can keep it this way. And for this very complex portal page where you pull in information from different Drupal sources and perhaps even external sources, like in the first Amazing Now, we had this example where we pulled the number of Drupal bugs from Drupal.org live into Drupal with GraphQL. That's where we can use GraphQL. So the key here is that you don't have to go all in and decouple everything, but you can use GraphQL and this whole power of decoupled components where it makes sense and where it helps you, and you don't have to throw everything away that Drupal brings you.
Cool, thanks. Alvaro has a question. What if I have a block with some specific cache context, like user or a short lifetime? Do I have to be careful with some special stuff?
Block in which context? So you can, if you just render a block, it will be just So for example, the content area is just used as a block, and it will just behave as every Drupal block does. Then if you override a block template and use GraphQL within the block, GraphQL will pass on all cache information that it collects during its query and give it to the rendering layer. And there again, it's just handled the way Drupal intends it to be. And there's also the possibility to actually fetch blocks within GraphQL by region, but that's probably not something you would use with GraphQL and Twig. So I'm not completely sure what you would have to be careful about in this case.
Okay, cool. Is there any other questions? Feel free to write in the Q&A or the chat, or raise your hand and I can allow you to talk as well.
Perhaps in the meantime, we could run a little experiment since we have some time.
Sure.
So what's now nice about, we might want to display the taxonomy terms along with a blog article. So how would we approach this? Particle theme. What does this mean?
Daniel, could you elaborate what you mean by particle theme?
No. No, in this case, we're just really using, if you look at the configuration, this is really a completely vanilla Drupal theme. It doesn't even extend on Start. It's just, it doesn't have a base theme. And all we did is initiate Fractal in there and then link the style sheet. And the important part, or the only connection we have to Fractal, is if we look at the Fractal configuration. So we're using the Twig adapter for Fractal by Wondrous. And this is the important part. We set the handle prefix to hash. And there is a dedicated template loader in GraphQL Twig that will just search for all .twig files in the components folder within the currently active theme. And if the template that you're trying to address starts with a hash, then it kicks in and tries to pull this template out of the components folder. So that's the only connection we actually really need between GraphQL, between Fractal and Drupal, that they are able to address templates the same way. Yes, exactly. Thanks, Dan. So you can look through all this code in the GitHub repository, and feel free to join us on the Drupal Slack in the GraphQL channel. So we're constantly answering questions and brainstorming with the community there where GraphQL should go, and we're happy for any help and all suggestions. Yes, and so it's actually, I think it's by time for our closing slide. Thank you very much for watching and listening.